Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan. It's a great pleasure to have you all on the call this morning for our Do You Suffer from InfoPath Anxiety session, and ultimately how we can eliminate InfoPath anxiety. My name is Jonathan King. I'm the Director for Technical Presales here at K2. And this particular topic is near and dear to my heart, and it's most probably very near and dear to the hearts of many here at K2. On a very personal level, InfoPath is something that I came across maybe 8.5 years ago, back early in 2005, when it was InfoPath 2003, even before the SP1 release there. And it's something that I've been working with day in, day out over the last 8 years or so. And in preparation for this particular session, I was trying to think how many InfoPath forms I've built over that period, and the best I could come up with was hundreds. And that's not an exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination. That's something that I've used quite extensively, and certainly a lot of people here at K2 have done likewise. And we'll talk about that as we go through this session. Before we get started, a couple of big announcements and things I'd like to draw your attention to. So the K2 User Conference, the Fast Forward Conference, I'm happy to announce will be taking place on March 1st and 2nd of 2014 in Las Vegas. That user conference will be a great couple of days showcasing a couple of different tracks, both a business track and a technical track, really talking about what K2 is all about, hearing customer stories, hear about the future of the K2 product, what we're doing in a variety of different spaces there. So if you're a K2 customer, a K2 partner, or you're interested in K2, that's a great opportunity to do some really intense learning and education around the K2 platform, and also some great networking with your fellow K2 community participants. Being the 1st and 2nd of March, that leads very nicely into the SharePoint Conference 2014. In fact, it's the 2 days prior to the SharePoint Conference. And as part of that conference, I'm happy to announce that K2 is the diamond sponsor for SharePoint Conference 2014, running from March 3 to 6. So a great week of content down in Vegas at the beginning of March there, from both the K2 User Conference, the Fast Forward Conference, and then you'll see a tremendous presence from K2 at the SharePoint Conference, talking about a variety of different things, obviously around SharePoint and beyond as well. If you want any more information about that, then please come. You can visit obviously k2conference.com about the user conference, or you can contact your local K2 rep about that as well. So as I said, moving into today's content, the InfoPath is a topic near and dear to my heart, near and dear to the hearts of many here at K2, and obviously the K2 community at large, simply because it's a product and an integration point that K2 has had for many, many years. But it was interesting as we ran through the last year or so. It's been just over a year since SharePoint 2013 went RTM, as well as Office 2013 and the associated Office 365 and that whole range of products. I think it was back in October of last year. And so when that product was announced, there's some fantastic feature enhancements that came as part of that. We obviously saw the introduction of a truly first-class cloud platform for SharePoint, for Office 365 and the associated services with that. We saw the likes of Word, PowerPoint, OneNote, etc. move to web-based applications as well as being thick client applications. We saw a full range of solutions being added to that platform. We saw the advent of social being introduced not only in SharePoint itself, but with the introduction of Yammer, and really being the social underpinnings not only for SharePoint, but for the full range of Microsoft products as well. And that was fantastic, and everyone was very excited about that, 12 months, 13 months ago, and even, for those of us who were participating in the beta leading up to that the 6 months prior. But something that was perhaps conspicuous in its absence was any mention of InfoPath as part of those announcements. Obviously, being a product that we work quite closely with, we found that very interesting, and not only ourselves, myself personally, but also those of us surrounding K2 and in the broader SharePoint community found that very interesting, that there wasn't really any new features, there really wasn't any big announcement with how InfoPath was moving into this world of modern apps, how it was going to be incorporated into this concept of cloud and working with both cloud services, etc., and on-premise data. And so as part of that, we obviously thought it was interesting. So I started doing a little bit of digging just to really, to find out what was new, like we go through all of these exercises with any new product release from Microsoft. We go through and find out, the nitty-gritty of really what's in the box, as well as all of this. And so as part of that exercise, obviously started digging through MSDN and the variety of Microsoft platforms. And there's a couple of little things that I found amusing more than anything else as I went through that exercise, was that early on, as I was going through the documentation and the help material, Microsoft were quite happy to call out the fact that, really the InfoPath 2013 was only upgraded a little. 2010 was such a major release in their mind. I maybe beg to differ a little bit on that, but basically they're calling out the fact that really 2013 was only a minor upgrade as part of that exercise, which was nice of them to do. And it also made their documentation team most probably pretty happy, because largely the documentation for InfoPath 2013 is a copy and paste of the 2010 content. And in actual fact, if you follow a lot of it, it'll send you off to 2010 content directly. Another little thing I found interesting when I was trying to do some more research around InfoPath was I did the classic, I'll type in microsoft.com/InfoPath and hopefully take me straight to the product page. Well, unfortunately, even today, as of about 10 minutes ago, if you do that and type in microsoft.com/InfoPath, it takes you to a page not found error, and gives you a nice little instruction on perhaps trying to search for another product. Do the same for things like Publisher, Word, Commerce Server, etc. You'll go straight to the pages as well. So that was just a little bit interesting, more amusing than anything else. But perhaps an indication of Microsoft's thought and investment around InfoPath during that 2013 cycle. If you want to have a little bit of fun, type in microsoft.com/front page and see what happens there as well. And so that was interesting to understand that, look, clearly in the documentation and in the marketing material, there wasn't really a lot said. And even back at SharePoint Conference 2012, I can't recall there actually being any sessions on InfoPath whatsoever. So all of these sort of things combined, and obviously in my mind it was an interesting exercise, but also in the broader SharePoint community. There are a lot of people asking questions as to really what was the future of InfoPath, because if there's no investment in it as a product, what's its long-term path? So a well-respected MVP, Andrew Connell, posted a great blog post a couple of months back about this. I've just grabbed one snippet out of that. I strongly recommend you have a read of Andrew's blog posts about this. But it was really about, would you recommend InfoPath going forward? And long story short, as part of Andrew's blog, was at this point, given the uncertainty around it, wasn't sure that he could do that. Equally, another great blog post by Scott ELLIS basically came to a similar conclusion along the lines of, there's a lot of outstanding questions around InfoPath. Can we advocate it for customers we're dealing with, for solutions we're going to be rolling out as well? And only maybe 2 weeks ago on a forum, I saw another well-respected MVP, Joel Olsen, ask a similar question around the future of InfoPath. Were there going to be any sessions at the upcoming SharePoint conference and things like that? So it really isn't just a K2 concept asking these questions. It is really a broader or an outstanding question being posed by the SharePoint community at large. Just so you understand, and perhaps for those of you on the call, and we've got quite a mixed audience here today, is that K2 has actually a tremendously long history with InfoPath. In fact, our history with InfoPath predates the name InfoPath. We started working with what would become InfoPath. It was previously as part of the alpha phases called XDocs. We started working with the team in the alpha phases of the V1 of that product back in what would be early 2003, perhaps even before that. So we have over a decade's worth of history with InfoPath. We provided rich integration with that very first release of InfoPath as part of K2's previous product, K2.NET 2003, to the point where actually K2 workflow was shown integrating with an InfoPath process and form as part of the Office 2003 launch video. A few guys, notably our CEO Adrian, was part of the InfoPath and combined with the InfoPath team at the Office 2003 global launch, again showing InfoPath integrating with a process and using that forms experience to drive workflow as well. Even to this day, the K2 technical community has a wealth of InfoPath experience in rolling out InfoPath solutions across the globe for many years and continues to do so today as well. And from a very personal perspective, I would argue that you know, not only based upon that history, but really based around what K2 does with InfoPath, that you know, I think we've done most probably more than anyone in the industry to drive InfoPath adoption, to drive the usability of InfoPath. I'll talk in a moment about some of the constraints that InfoPath has, but K2 combined with InfoPath really turns InfoPath from a very document-centric forms technology into more of a literally a forms on workflow or forms on information-based approach, where actually you can fill in the form and and really extract a lot of the business logic out of that form and have it into a standardized K2 workflow and really draw on the necessary forms and present the right form, the right view to the right user as we go through that K2 workflow. So K2's investment in InfoPath has been a long and deep relationship, and that's something we can talk about as we go forward there as well. For those of you perhaps are new to K2 in the last couple of years and who never saw K2.NET 2003, this was the old designer. For those of you who are brand new to K2, don't worry, this isn't the designer of today, but this is the designer from back in 2003 days, and in terms of a concept, it looks somewhat similar. It's just a classic boxes and arrows workflow, but you'll see there's deep integration with InfoPath Forms, and obviously will come InfoPath 2007 and Form Services, the integration with that as well. And even some of the wizards you'll notice have some similarities, largely because InfoPath, the basis for what InfoPath is, the technology and how it's structured, really hasn't changed too much over the last decade or so. And so they're just a couple of screenshots of days gone by with the K2.NET 2003 product integrating with InfoPath at that stage. If we look to today, it's not just about, and you know, this session, don't get me wrong, isn't about pointing fingers and questioning what InfoPath's about. But if we look at the form needs of organizations today, they're building modern applications, and the requirements around electronic forms in that sense has changed somewhat, particularly around how we go about not only building, designing, and integrating those forms. It's about how we access those forms, how we present them to users in different experiences. So most, when we talk to customers today, they're looking for really a truly browser-based experience. They want drag and drop interface to actually compose forms. Importantly, they want those forms to be bound to their line of business information. So if they're building a form, they don't want to be having to duplicate that information or capturing it in one area and then sort of copying and pasting it into another. They actually want to build their forms on the line of business data from their systems of record directly. Importantly, in this world where obviously SharePoint is a massive part of a lot of people's lives in terms of not only delivering solutions but consuming those solutions, but we also have a variety of other applications and a variety of other platforms we use both on-premises and in the cloud that we actually need that forms experience in as well. So we actually need a forms experience that really is adaptable and flexible enough to not only work with the information that resides within those platforms, but also can consume that information and present it to end users as part of a form. I spoke about being able to incorporate both on-premises and cloud-based information. Depending upon your need, that may vary. You still may be in an entirely on-premises world, and that's fantastic, or you may be adopting cloud, or you may be really what a lot of people are going to be doing over the next 5 years at least is having this hybrid situation where you have solutions on-premises and in the cloud, and you're going to need to be able to deliver solutions that span both of those domains. Then you need to be able to incorporate that information into a single form, get all of the information you need in one particular user experience, and then be able to take action on that, whatever that may be. Obviously, from a technology perspective, things have moved on as well. People are expecting now HTML5-based applications, making sure we can take advantage of the latest and greatest technologies that reside within the browser, and not only desktop browsers, but obviously mobile browsers as well. Browsers on my phone, on the variety of different tablets that are around, even nowadays going so far as to being on the television as well. And ultimately, not only do we want to build forms, we want to build forms on business data, but we also want the option of building just forms and data solutions, but we also want to build forms, data, and workflow solutions as well. And we want to be able to do that on the exact same platform. We don't have to be swapping between, I've got one technology that just builds me forms, and I've got another technology that builds me forms and workflow combined, and then perhaps I have a different technology that's building me forms in SharePoint. What we actually need is just one form solution that really delivers applications into the business across those different environments, makes maintenance a lot easier, obviously cost of ownership a lot easier, and really the flexibility of having that type of solution can't be underestimated. So when we look at all of those needs, that's really what modern forms needs are from customers as we talk to them today. And so it's interesting that InfoPath in itself, I mentioned before, if you look at the foundations of InfoPath 10 years ago and you look at the product it is today, it's still a very relevant product in the market, but I would argue that it's perhaps struggling to meet those modern forms needs as required by customers, organizations across the globe. If you've worked with InfoPath in any way, shape or form, that first line there, some rules were not applied, is most probably a line that will give you somewhat of a shudder. I thought about calling this whole session that particular topic, as it's a particular error message you'll see quite frequently when working with InfoPath, particularly if you're using third-party data sources as part of that. But InfoPath itself, just because of the way and the time it was built, has a number of different limitations. I called out a few of those. Actually, I sourced this list by reaching out to our professional services organization, as I do from time to time, asking for their expert input on this, and never have I received such a quick and comprehensive response as to when I pose this particular question to them. One of the fundamentals elements of InfoPath is that it is ultimately a document-centric forms technology. If you go about and you actually go and read the patent that went into producing InfoPath, you can go and find that through Wikipedia, as I did the other evening. It actually talks about building dynamic HTML user experiences on top of XML. And if you perhaps don't know what that means, we can explain it perhaps in the Q&A. But ultimately, it's about building a user experience on top of XML documents. And so that XML document is still the underpinnings of InfoPath today, and it makes it a very document-centric technology. When you fill in an InfoPath form using the default experience, you're actually storing that information in an XML document. And what that means is it turns it into really a document-centric forms technology. And I draw the analogy between I can fill in a piece of paper with a printed out piece of paper and write in all the forms, and then I can hand it around my organization. To be fair, InfoPath is the digital equivalent to that with its default behavior. Admittedly, you can add third-party data sources and hook it up to web services and the like, and that does go some way to alleviate that that pain, but that really becomes a moderate to moderately complex exercise for a lot of people. So that default behavior, that document-centric nature is challenging because in terms of accessing that information, if I have an InfoPath form in SharePoint, it is a document. So what happens if I want to report against that information? What happens if I want to use that information in other applications, feed that information to other systems? Well, then I need to start adding third-party data sources, passing information to different web services, etc., and the complexity grows from there as well. To this day, InfoPath is thick client design tooling, which isn't ideal for a lot of people, particularly in terms of when we're dealing with standard operating environments, controlled desktops and the like. Somewhat limited reuse. As I mentioned, I've built a fair few InfoPath forms in my time, and despite the best efforts they've made, there's a lot of copy and paste, particularly in documents, components between various views on a form, even within a form. There's a lot of copy and paste. So reuse by copy and paste can be quick and easy sometimes, but long term it becomes somewhat unmanageable. I spoke earlier about the amount of business logic that gets embedded in a form. One of the great applications of K2 in that 10 years of history we have with InfoPath is that K2 helped alleviate that tremendously, where you could actually, the whole idea of a K2 workflow was to actually drive the business logic as to how people interacted with that form, when they received that form, what information they needed to capture at that particular time. But by default, a lot of the business logic is heavily embedded within that form, and that makes managing that quite difficult. Obviously, there's licensing considerations as well. Even today, InfoPath is part of the enterprise and medium business SKUs within things like Office 365. And then finally, in terms of broad-based use and access, even today, some of the mobile browsing rendering is somewhat questionable, largely because of some of the controls still remain as ActiveX controls as part of InfoPath. So if you've used InfoPath, you're most probably familiar with a lot of those. And as I said, this isn't a knock on InfoPath. It really just comes from how the technology's evolved, and over in recent years, the amount of investment that's gone into it as well. But if we align with that with what customers are seeking from a modern form solution, there's a lot of challenges there, not only building solutions today, but as we look down the road, building solutions over the next 3 to 5 years as well. So InfoPath anxiety, and I use this term fairly pointedly because I've had a lot of conversations, as has people in my team and people across the whole K2 organization and the K2 community, around what's happening with InfoPath, not only because of the investment, but because of their needs for modern form solutions and what InfoPath delivers today. So some of that anxiety, as I've touched on before, where that investment is coming from, if there is investment going into InfoPath at all. Additionally, there's no real clear replacement for InfoPath. The SharePoint blog earlier in the year published an article around options to create forms in SharePoint 2013. InfoPath was on that list. It was first on that list. And the other options I listed were Visual Studio, which is fine, and you can build some fantastic solutions within Visual Studio, but you are coding those solutions. You're jumping into C#, or more frequently nowadays, you're jumping into HTML5 and JavaScript and jQuery and all of the associated libraries that go along with that. And even there's challenge in terms of skill set there. And also there's a long-term code maintenance constraint there as well. The more code you develop, the more costly it is over time to maintain. Access services has grown over the last number of years, and in fairness, that's fantastic. It doesn't really shake its somewhat questionable heritage, and equally, if you dive into access services, you quickly realize it suffers from many of the same limitations as InfoPath. It's a thick line design experience. It has no workflow integration. It's single line of business. It really can't be extended. And so it actually doesn't go and solve all of those modern forms requirements that we mapped out earlier, and actually doesn't get us too far down the line either. And then finally, one of the other forms technologies listed in that blog was Excel. I honestly don't know what to say to that outside of Excel is Excel, and I couldn't really advocate that being a forms technology in any way, shape or form in respect to delivering business solutions to users. Don't get me wrong, Excel is a fantastic product, but in the context of building business forms and delivering those to users pervasively across an organization and driving workflows and forms on data outside of just a spreadsheet, in fairness, Excel is Excel. In addition to this, we've seen things like Light Switch get some attention in recent months as well. Ultimately, that falls in that same Visual Studio bucket as well. And then finally, the app model will at times get promoted, that new app model that's in the SharePoint 2013 experience, as well as the Office 2013 experience as well. That is a technology for integration. It's not a forms opportunity as such, and it's still very obviously developer-centric. And so the anxiety for a lot of customers is the fact that if they look at what their needs are both now and into the future, they look at what they've been doing in the last number of years, particularly if they're an InfoPath customer, they start to question, well, how can I go forward with this technology? How can it meet the needs of the organization and the needs of the solutions that I need to deliver into my business as well? So from a K2 point of view, we, have been a big proponent of InfoPath for a very long time, as I suggested, but we saw, many years ago, we saw that, as a technology, K2 needed to invest in its own forms technology. We needed to deliver, customers were coming to us for a comprehensive platform of forms, workflow, and data. They wanted to deliver business applications into their organization, and they needed a powerful forms platform that they could use today and that also could grow into the future as they saw the advent of things like mobile and cloud and things like that come in line as well. And so that's where K2, as an organization, we've invested very heavily into K2 SmartForms. And K2 SmartForms is now a core pillar of the K2 platform, sitting there with workflow, sitting there with data integration, and it really now gives us the capacity to deliver process-based applications across a variety of different needs within an organization, whether that's just simple collaborative solutions in the context of SharePoint, document approval and routing, just simple leave request expense claims, and you can go all the way up to the other end of the spectrum where you're talking about core business solutions that are integrating with a variety of line of business platforms that are delivering core scenarios within to an organization, really driving that organization forward, things like new business intake in the legal space. as well as insurance claim review, etc., even going into things like financial services. And so SmartForms today is really the answer for K2 for delivering form solutions into our customer base and really giving them the ability to deliver form solutions not only in SharePoint, SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, but really across the spectrum of solutions that organizations have today. And I'll show you a few examples of that as we go forward. So K2 SmartForms, it's entirely browser-based, not only in the design experience, drag and drop, I'll show you some of that in just a moment, but it's also in terms of runtime. It gives us great flexibility in terms of delivering form solutions directly within that SharePoint context, heavily embedded within SharePoint if that's the experience you're looking for, but equally you can use those same forms, take them outside of SharePoint and deliver an entirely standalone experience through the browser using the exact same assets. So if you think about your audiences within an organization today, some people are heavily invested in SharePoint, they spend their day there. Some people, more transitory, they spend they come perhaps once or twice. Other people perhaps would never touch SharePoint in the organization. How can we deliver forms and forms-based solutions, build them once, but deliver those to those different audiences in my business? SmartForms is a great opportunity for that as well. And ultimately, it's about building not only forms on your line of business data. I'll show you examples of building smart forms on a variety of different information sources today, things like Dynamic CRM, SharePoint lists and libraries, SQL Server, SAP, just to name a few, and then we can obviously talk about cloud-based environments as well. But I can use all of those and build smart forms on all of those line of business systems, and I can even start incorporating all of those different information sources into one form, either as different views or as lookups for different controls and things like that. And really, SmartForms is the answer for us as an organization. So I guess the question that some people are going to have is, well, what's K2's future with InfoPath? I guess the best sort of analogy I can draw is that, for a long time, K2 and InfoPath were somewhat exclusive in our relationship. Recently, I think we've decided that our future lies elsewhere. We remain very, very good friends, but we've decided to see other people. And in actual fact, from a K2 standpoint, we'll maintain our investment in InfoPath. We have some fantastic and rich integration with InfoPath in SharePoint 2010 and even SharePoint 2010 site collections in the 2013 context. But as it stands, we won't be investing in InfoPath 2013 as when we release our SharePoint 2013 integration at the beginning of next year. SmartForms is really the solution for K2. Not only are we having SmartForms heavily integrated within that SharePoint 2013 environment, but we're also building the K2 platform using SmartForms. Some of the new features we'll release over the course of over the course of 2014 are built entirely based on SmartForms, things like our administration interfaces and the like. So we're actually using our own technology to build the K2 platform there as well. For those of you perhaps new to K2, SmartForms is just one component of the broader K2 platform for building business applications. And remember that business applications concept range from just simple business applications, expense claims, leave requests, room bookings in an organization based around SharePoint assets, all the way up to core enterprise solutions. But really that K2 platform comprises of workflow, forms, data, and reporting. That data piece is around what we call smart objects. It's about being able to work with a variety of different line of business systems and abstracting away all of the complexity of working with those. I can build these smart objects, really define what my information looks like and how I can work with that. And I can use a smart object that talks to SAP in exactly the same way as I use a smart object that talks to a list and library in SharePoint. And that makes it very easy to go and build these solutions because really the data I'm working with, all that complexity is taken away from me. And it's a great way of having IT enable citizen developers to go about building these solutions as well. We've spoken about SmartForms, and I'll show you a demo of that in a moment. And obviously that workflow platform as part of K2 is a critical component, has been for a very long time, building workflows that really standardize and structure how you go about executing work within your organization, automating activities involving the right user at the right time. And that's part of that overall K2 platform. So if you're brand new to K2, the SmartForms piece is just one element of a broader platform. We run a variety of webinars that really go into detail about that. Happy to take you through that as well at another time. So SmartForms itself, I'm going to jump into a demo in just a moment just to give you some high-level themes around what the capabilities of SmartForms is. Obviously, you'd expect things like, theming, being able to, customize it for your organizational look and feel, being able to deliver those features through both browser-based, desktop experiences as well as mobile experiences. You've got classic things like being able to surface various line of business information. I've spoken about that a few times. Standard forms, things you'd expect, validation, rules, mandatory fields, cascading drop-down lists. All of that are just standard elements of the platform. Big focus on reusability. We want to make sure that we can build a view, build an element of a form once, and then reuse it across multiple forms. So if I've got perhaps some employee details that I'm going to use across every form, fantastic. I'm going to build a view, and if you're familiar with SharePoint, a view is sort of like a web part where I can use it over and over again. I'm going to build that view once, and I'm going to be able to use it across multiple forms. And that reuse makes it a real accelerator for creating forms. So I can, the more forms I build, the faster it actually becomes. Variety of different controls, text boxes, drop-down lists, pick lists, iframe controls, variety of different things there that you can do. I'll show you some of those in just a moment as well. And the great thing also is very extensible. So we provide a fantastic platform. We continue to innovate on that platform with SmartForms and obviously the broader K2 platform itself. But if you're looking for something very specific, or you're a partner and you want to create and extend that the K2 SmartForms platform, well, fantastic. We give you the opportunity to go and create your own custom controls. And if you go to our K2 community site, k2underground.com today, there's a variety of controls that have been written by our partners and our customers on there as well that is already extending that SmartForms platform. Importantly, I've spoken about it a few times, we want to make sure we can build these forms once, experience them on multiple devices as well. So before I jump into the demo, I just wanted to highlight one thing. SmartForms has been was released about 15 months ago, maybe a bit longer now. We've had some fantastic uptake within the K2 community, both existing customers and new customers coming on board. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the solutions that people have delivered using SmartForms experiences. And as I said, they really cover the full gamut of solution types within a business. Simple, easy, quick forms, all the way up to core business, driving enterprise organizations and really driving the core element of their organization too. Equally, these solutions are being delivered within the firewall and outside of the firewall as well. Another great advantage of SmartForms, sometimes was a challenge with InfoPath, particularly around licensing, as to how you can deliver those forms to perhaps your customers and people outside of that organizational boundary. So things like new business intake we've touched on, financial assessments in the financial services space, infectious disease control, things like surveys, all the way down to a lot of horizontal-based solutions, leave requests, expense claims, employee onboarding, the standard stuff that everyone needs, and a lot of the time doesn't get automated within a business. And from a K2 perspective, we're using SmartForms to build our own internal applications as well. Our IT organization is most probably very similar to a number of your internal IT organizations. Too much work, not enough time. And one of the great solutions they're building at the moment is all around for the technical team being able to manage a lot of the Azure assets we have today, and being able to manage that through an entirely SmartForms-driven experience. So there's an internal K2 application managing entirely cloud-based infrastructure for us there as well. All right, so enough of the slides. Let's jump into a demo. And as I said, we've got a fairly broad audience today, and this session is not designed to be an introduction session to K2 as a whole. If you would like more information about the whole K2 platform, then fantastic. I'll give you some webinars you can attend in about 20 minutes or so. But really, we're going to jump in and just focus on the forms element of that. And see how we can go about building forms applications with K2 SmartForms and some of the other core components, things like smart objects as well. So Michelle, just confirm that you can see my screen here with K2 Designer for me?
Yes, can see your screen.
Fantastic. So I moved into an environment here. I'm in a SharePoint 2010 environment for today. I want to make it clear that K2 SmartForms is going to run quite happily within your SharePoint 2013 environment. If we've got some time, I can show you that. There's also some webinars running specifically around K2 and SharePoint 2013 and what's coming, what's going to RTM at the beginning of next year. There's already a beta available for that as well. We'll jump into that. But the reason I chose 2010 is that, by and large, A lot of organizations remain on 2010. When I talk about hybrid as well, it's not only about on-premises and cloud, it's also about having hybrid versions of SharePoint in organizations as well. So going to focus on 2010. Everything's entirely applicable to 2013. In fact, it's even more embedded and more fantastic in 2013 as well. But I wanted to start with a simple introduction around what's possible with SmartForms. We're going to build out an application and talk about some of the fundamentals and what you can do with that. So just wanted to give you some insight first. Here I am within SharePoint 2010. It's been with us for some time now. It's fantastic. Just want to show you, I've got a new capital expenditure solution here, and this is the solution I'm going to go about and building some of the elements of for the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to drive into my new capital expenditure claim. I'm still within the context of SharePoint here, and it's going to load for me my K2 smart form. Now my smart form in this example is actually going to have a number of different elements. In just a second, I'm going to go about and show you how I went and built a large portion of this form, talk about some of the fundamentals. But what we have here is we have a nice capital expenditure form. You can see it's broken into different sections, things like project details, cost estimates, financial year costs. We've got a combination of views here. We've got what we call an item view at the top here, then another one for cost estimates, and then in our fiscal year costs, we've actually got a list view where it's going to list a variety of a whole range of data. And the great thing is these can be read-only or they can be editable lists, and I'll show you that too. So let's just fill in our new project. I'm going to call it the team. You'll notice that it's picked up things like who I am. I'm currently logged in as administrator, things like that. So it's actually picked up details. All of this information, things like the department I'm in, my location, my phone number, that's immediately being sourced from Active Directory. So we've already seen one element of line of business integration there. We're going to write these off over 3 years. Things like date controls here, just standard controls that you'd expect. I'm going to show you how easy it is to use those. I'm just going to put the date nice and simple. We'll run that over 3 years as well. And so you can see the variety of different controls here. I've got a nice drop-down list here. Now this drop-down list at the moment, pretty static. Actually want to most probably convert that in just a moment. Actually, I'm going to change some of the elements on this form because really having this static drop-down of values isn't really as powerful as I need it. I need the flexibility, and actually I want to draw some of this information from another line of business system. So we'll actually make a change to that when we go and edit this form. Also in terms of things like attaching documents, a variety of types, uploading those into things like SharePoint, SharePoint on premises, SharePoint in the cloud, storing those in other locations or other document management systems if you want. Fantastic. You can do that directly from your form as well. You can upload those forms into really whatever document repository that makes sense for the solution you're building, for the organization that you're working in. Just going to grab some values here. You'll notice things like data masking as well. So as I type in things like currencies, we can go and automatically format that. Same applies for things like social security numbers and the like, as you'd expect. And then finally, we've got this nice little inline editing of a list control here, and I'm just going to write this off over the first year as well. And so you can see I'm being able to edit inline within my list control, and you can also see it's doing things like aggregates and the like here as well. The other great feature here is that all of the information I'm typing in, if it's not being sourced from an existing line of business system, I'm actually going to save it directly to a formal repository. And what I mean by that is I get to choose where I save all of this information. In my example, I want to save it into a custom table within SQL Server because that makes it easy to access that information for things like reporting and analysis. But I could equally save this information just to a list within SharePoint if that was suitable for my needs. Or I could go and save this information into Dynamics CRM or Oracle or SAP, whatever line of business system you're using. Through the power of smart objects, you can do that as well. The other nice thing here is I could just save this and have a forms on data experience. Perfectly fine. But equally, very simply, what I can do as part of this solution is when I save this particular and submit this request, not only does it save all of my information to my repository, but it also goes and starts a K2 workflow that is then going to manage how we go about the approval cycle for my capital expenditure. So we're seeing this combination of forms, forms on data, and also forms on data with workflow if we want. We can build all of those types of solutions. It's entirely up to you. So not every smart form solution you build with K2 has to be associated with a workflow. Not at all. So I've got my requests, and it just takes me back to a nice overview of all of my different requests that I've got here. Some are in process, some are saved. Fantastic. that's another example of a list view within my SmartForms experience. So that's enough of the end user piece. Let's go and see and let's go and add, let's go and build that particular form. Let's go and make some changes to it, because what we want to do is we want to add some more context. We want to include things like, well, what project or what customer is this associated with? Perhaps we want some context around, well, if we're working with purchasing equipment, we perhaps need to be cognizant of things like exchange rates, because that's coming from, perhaps it's being sourced from another organization or another office, and we need to be conscious of that as well. So I'm going to move into my design experience here for K2 SmartForms. It's the K2 Designer. You can see I've loaded this up in Chrome. K2 SmartForms merrily work with any of the modern browsers, whether that's Safari, Chrome, Mozilla, or IE. I've just picked Chrome for today's experience. And what I'm going to do is I can see here that I have what we call the category system. That's just a variety, it's a bunch of folders you'd be familiar with. And I'm going to move into my environment here. And you'll see that I've got a number of different assets, and I've actually broken those out into subcategories. I've called them things like forms, I've called them views, and that's just a nice system I use to sort of break up the different objects so that they're nice and clear for me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a brand new view. Now remember when I was showing you the SmartForm, we had those different sections on that one form. They were each views. All of those views are reusable, and I can drag them onto my different form. So I'm going to go and create one of those views to go and capture some of those details. So here we are. I'm going to come into views, and I can obviously do this anywhere. Now remember, this is all going to be based around my smart objects. And I spoke about this before, and if you're brand new to K2 and this is the first experience you've had with K2, smart objects, remember, is just really describing what my data looks like and where it lives and what I can do with it. So this is a smart object, and if I come into my project details here and I give this an edit, it'll show me things like, here are all the properties that relate to this particular smart object. So there are all the different data elements, things I can capture: name, description, submission date, department. In fact, we saw a lot of that on the form we saw before. And so this is all available to me, and it also describes where this information lives. And in our case, happens to live in SQL Server, could be a SharePoint list, could be any other line of business system you want to use. But let's go and create a new view and use this particular smart object to bind this information to. It just means as soon as I type that information in and save it, it's going to live in a system of record for me. So I'm going to call that project details. You get to choose if it's an item view or a list view. Obviously for today we're going to use an item view because I want to capture those details. And I'm going to go and find that smart object. I could have dragged it in, but for the sake of just showing you some elements of the user experience, let me come and grab that. While I'm doing that, for those of you who are interested, obviously we promised today to give away a pass to the SharePoint 2014 conference, and we will do that during the Q&A section as we wrap up the call in about 20 minutes or so. So as you go through, I start with this design canvas. So I spoke earlier about being able to design and compose forms, and that's what you're doing here. You're not coding forms. If you're familiar with InfoPath, it's actually going to be very familiar paradigm for you. The nice thing we have here, and let me just grab some real estate. The nice thing we have here is within this design canvas where I'm going to create my form, I can have not only that canvas, but I also have access to all of the context that I'm working with that came from that smart object. So I guess the best example that I can give you here is that think about the data source within InfoPath, but this is a lot more powerful. Equally, it's not document-centric as well. It gives me the different things I can do with that information, and it gives me a whole range of controls that I can just drag on as well. So let me start creating this form. I'm going to create a really simple table-based layout. I'm going to have 4 columns. Let me have maybe 5 or 6 rows, and let's start designing my form here. So as I said, because this view knows it's working with the information, that smart object is really providing all of the information, I'm just going to start dragging on things like name. Let's move the label over here. Let's grab submission date. I'm actually going to simplify it just a little bit for the sake of time. I'm going to grab things like requester. And you'll notice requester actually has an association, so it actually comes back. So it means it's actually associated with a different smart object. There's a relationship there. Smart objects and SmartForms is smart enough to pick that up, as you'd expect from the names, and actually present a different control for that. We'll have a play with that in just a second. Let's go and grab something like department, and then also a couple of things like type. And in the previous example, we had different types. What we're going to do is, I don't want to actually use type. I'm actually going to call this customer. So I'm going to select my control here. You can see the text down in my properties pane, and I'm just going to relabel that and call it customer. The great thing about SmartForms as well, there's an auto-generate feature. I can actually just select one of those smart objects and go auto-generate, and it'll do all of this for me. For today's example, just wanted to show you how we can do this manually. I'm just going to drag on something like start date, take on end date. You'll notice here that because I've grabbed a date, K2 recognizes that it's a date, and so it will immediately give me a date control as well. And then finally, let's grab something like description, and perhaps even we'll go and add a forms control and upload control for a document. Description, we actually want to give them some more space, so I can actually come here and select the cell that I'm working in, and you'll notice at the top here it'll give me some options, things like let's go and merge that out just so I can get my cell details here, and I can even go and change the type of data here as well. And you'll notice in the properties pane it's got things like is it visible, is it enabled, is it read-only. So if you're creating fields and you want certain elements to be read-only, certain elements to only change or only be editable based upon certain conditions, then you can do that too. You can have things like conditional styling, you can go and change the different fonts, you can add images, all of that standard forms experience functionality you'd expect. You can even do some pattern matching here. We saw earlier about having a currency field, being able to actually lay that out correctly and map that correctly. That's easily done through that pattern experience as well. So all of these you can set manually. You can also set these dynamically in rules, which we'll have a play with as well. So one thing I wanted to do, I wanted to actually have a customer. And as an organization, we use dynamic CRM, so I want to make an easy lookup for my customer based around that information. So what I actually want to do here is, I don't want a text box. I actually want to come and click on my toolbar at the top, and I actually want to convert this to a picker control, and I'll show you what that means. Another little feature you'll notice here is this Save as PDF control. A lot of times working with InfoPath, people wanted to archive forms, and archiving forms in InfoPath was a little bit of a hassle, particularly if you were going to archive that over 10 or 20 years. One of the great features of SmartForms out of the box is that you can actually save a form as a PDF natively. It's actually a control, or you can call that from a workflow and archive the form that way as well. So any form you build, you can actually automatically convert that to a PDF. To give you a great example, perhaps capture a form, someone submits a form, you convert it to a PDF, you attach that into an email, and when someone gets a request to approve a particular a request of some description, they can see that attachment, they can see the PDF of the data that someone typed in. They don't necessarily have to leave their email. In actual fact, that's how I approve most of the tasks assigned to me within K2. So let's move back to our picker control. We obviously want to be able to find our customers. We want to hook this up to dynamic CRM. So that's really easy because I already have a smart object that's talking to my accounts within dynamic CRM, and this could be dynamic CRM on-premise or in the cloud. So I'm going to come into my properties pane down on the right-hand side here and grab that. I'm going to go and find my account entity as well. It's under my CRM5, and there we have my CRM account. Remember, this smart object talks to an entirely different line of business system, but for us, we don't mind because it looks and acts exactly like any other smart object, so it's actually really easy to deal with. You get the option of, well, what's the identifier, what's the display name. We can even go and change that because we want to make it a little bit more contextual, so we want the actual name, space, hyphen space, and then we want the account number in there as well, just so we can actually make some reference to that. Fantastic. So that's the start of our form. First elements, we've got a lookup here, we've got the requester details. We can obviously change this requester from a drop-down list. We actually want to change that to a picker as well, just so we can go and look these up nicely. So here's the start, the makings of that form we were working with. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to finish up here and just show you that we've got a couple of different fields. Wanted to do one more thing here as well, is that we want to show you some concept of rules. And so one of the rules concepts we want to do here is that when this form loads, we want to take the currently logged in user and put their details in that requester field. So we're going to do something really easy and say, well, excuse me. So we can come in here and we can create these rules. And the rules we're creating really just relate, we try and make them sort of natural language rules. It's like writing a sentence. And so we can select from a variety of different templates here as to, when people perform certain actions. We can have different view events here as well, and things like, well, when this form's initialized, what do we want to have happen? We can then get this concept of conditionals. We'll only fire this and perform this rule based upon certain things. And then what's the action we want to take? And the actions can be a variety of different things, like calling services, loading data, turning fields on and off, making them read-only, validating fields, things like that. For us, we just want to transfer some data. We can even do a nice little search here, makes it easy for us. We can configure that. And so this is how we go about creating interactive, rich forms experiences here as we go through. So we've got things like current user, current date. We also have all of that context that we're working with. So we can even go and use the information we're capturing here in those smart objects. We can go and retrieve other line of business information. We can go and look up services in the cloud and the like as well. But for me, I just want to grab the name of the person who's currently logged in and drag them onto that picker control as well. Fantastic. Let's do that. And we finish up creating those rules. And the nice thing is we can create a variety of different rules that interact. We can even have views interacting on a page as well. Just going to go back, do a quick little change here and configure this guy. The nice thing here is we can also do incremental testing on these forms, so we don't have to wait and build out an entire form to actually go and test this. We can actually build it really quickly and just test an individual view as well. So I can actually come here and run this view, and I've built that really, really quickly. So let's see what happens. So there you go. When we log into this form, nice and easy, we can actually see that it's loaded the details of the administrator. I've also got my customer lookup here, so I can actually launch this lookup and say, well, let's go and look for an account within Dynamics CRM. There's my A-Store account. You notice here that it's displaying both the name as well as the account number. We can add that guy. And I can even set this to add multiple accounts if I wanted to as well. We can see our different controls, fantastic, that we're adding here as well. So that's really nice. We've built the first view. Now let's go and add that to a form that we've created as well. So let's come back here. Let's see if we can wrap this up in 3 minutes to create a really interactive form. So I've got an existing form that I've been editing in the interest of time. Let's do the classic chef approach to here's one I created earlier. So I'm going to come in and edit my form. Now a form's different. A form composes of multiple views. I can go and add different controls directly to the form, but really the power from it comes when I can drag and drop those views I've already created directly onto my form. So you can see my form here, the same design experience we were talking about before. Different views on here, drag and drop. I'm going to go and find that view I created before. I'm going to drag that onto my canvas. And you'll notice my form changes. It adds all of that context. I can add a title for it. Let's even spell correctly. Fantastic. And that's what there. We also see here we've got concepts like tabs. We can go and add additional tabs. We can add controls directly onto this canvas. As I discussed, we've got the Save as PDF control. We can add different tables here. And you'll notice if we scroll down, there's even some additional buttons and things here that we've got rules behind to say when we submit this button, what happens. That all hooks up to that rules experience I was showing you before. We're going to be running a deep dive into SmartForms and workflow in 2 weeks' time, this exact same time on December 4th, I think it is. So in terms of a deep dive and a hands-on build experience, we'll be taking you through building this entire solution, building the forms, building the smart objects, incorporating it into a workflow. We'll be taking you through that session. So if you're looking for that in-depth experience, taking you through that whole build scenario, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be running a webinar specifically focused on that, and a lot more detail around the different options we have here as well. So there we have, we've got our view in here. We can even do some plumbing, because what we've done is I've added my CRM account details view here. So when I select an account, I want some extra information. Well, that's easy because I can also use those exact same rules that I was talking about before. And I'm going to do something really quickly here so we can get to some Q&A at the end of this as well. So what we want to say is, well, when a control raises an event, so we can go and say, well, when that project details, when that type picker, and when it's changed, what do we want to have happen? So we're constructing this sort of natural language rule. First of all, we want to make sure it only fires when it's got a value. So we'll go and do the same thing again. So when that type picker has a value, and then what do we want to have happen? And we can, not only can we perform one action, we can actually perform multiple if we wanted to. I'm just going to keep it really simple and say, we'll go and execute a view method on my CRM account details. I want you to load that information, and it needs a little bit of context as to what it's going to load. And I just need to come into my rules engine here, and you'll actually see it's got all of the context of the different views I'm working with, but I'm going to cruise through here, find my controls, and find that type picker, because that's got the value I want, and it's going to go and load that account if I've done this correctly. All right, so if you've got any questions, make sure you're logging those in the window, and we'll make sure we spend some time answering those. As I mentioned, there's a variety of different webinars and things like that we run on a weekly basis. If you're interested in really a hands-on deep dive experience into building forms and workflow, then certainly I recommend the session in a couple of weeks' time that we'll be running. And it would be a 90-minute session really focusing on building out those different solutions and taking it from building the smart objects, building the forms, integrating it with workflow. So let's see what I've done here, see if I've actually managed to do this quickly. Fantastic. Let's grab my store. You'll notice it just takes a second to load. Then I can switch my tabs, and there's all my account details directly from Dynamics. So I'm giving context to this request. It's not just about selecting it. Yes, this is the right account that I'm working with, and then I can go and fill in the rest of the details that I'm working with there as well, build out the rest of my form. So that's been a really, really quick example of building forms, experiencing what a form's possible, integrating that within a SharePoint experience. Other things you can do in SharePoint, there's a SmartForms web part, so I can go and embed SmartForms anywhere within my SharePoint experience, both in 2010 and in 2013. In 2013, there's a lot more, there's a lot richer integration, so even things like replacing the out-of-the-box forms experiences for lists and libraries with SmartForms, which gives you some great flexibility, then tying those to K2 Workflow, building all of that in a web-based experience. So all of that is going to be available in SharePoint 2013. The beta of that is already available. If you're interested, more than happy to take you through that as well. We run sessions on that fairly frequently as well. Happy to notify you and get you involved in one of those sessions. So the exact same design experience, the same approach, but building rich forms, not only on SharePoint information, but I can go and create a new list item and have context information from other line of business systems directly in my SharePoint forms, never leaving that SharePoint experience, which is fantastic. All right, so we're going to move into Q&A, just showing some screenshots here of things like embedding SmartForms in things like Dynamics CRM, even things like Salesforce.com, different applications, running them as standalone solutions as well. All right, Michelle, let's move to the questions. A couple of things as we do this. I really appreciate everyone's time. I really appreciate the fact that I've gone right up to the hour, and thank everyone for their patience. If you want to hang around, we're going to go through the Q&A section. If you want my details, I had those available. More than happy to take your questions offline. If questions around, was this session recorded? It most certainly was. We'll send you the details straight after this as well. For customers and partners, if you're interested, there's a great how-to article on InfoPath to K2 Forms migration that's up on help.k2.com. If you need those requirements, professional services, K2 Professional Services can do remote and on-site engagements as well. We're going to be running that webinar, as I mentioned, in 2 weeks' time. The same time slot as today. It's going to be that 90-minute deep dive into both K2 SmartForms and K2 Workflow and building those out. And obviously you can go to k2.com/events if you have any questions. Before we get to that first question, Michelle, I just want to make sure we announce who the winner of the SharePoint Conference 2014 attendee pass is. And the winner is Mr. Sean Burke. So Sean, we have your email. We will be emailing you later today to notify that you have been successful, so congratulations on that. Really thank everyone for their time today. Hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions, we'll take those now. And if you want to email me directly, the easiest email to get me at is the letter J, the letter K at k2.com. So that's jk at k2.com, and you can reach out to me directly. Happy to answer your questions or get you in touch with a K2 rep. If you're interested in SmartForms, if you're a customer or you're new to K2, we're running some fantastic offers up until the end of this year as well, so it's a great opportunity to invest in K2 at this time of the year. Okay, Michelle, what questions do we have?
Sure, we've got quite a few actually, so hopefully we can get through them all. First one is from April. Does your product rely on InfoPath forms, or can ASPX forms be used? What will happen to your solution if InfoPath does get deprecated?
That's a great question. So we don't rely on on InfoPath whatsoever. You can use obviously SmartForms to build your forms experience. Equally, you can build user experiences with ASP.NET, MVC5, Windows 8 applications, mobile devices. We provide a very rich and extensive API and services layer. So if you want to go and custom dev user experiences around K2 solutions, around K2 smart objects, if you want to incorporate it into existing solutions you've already built, fantastic. You can use our API and web services to go and do that too.
Next question, Matthew. Does SmartForms support working with users with different regional settings? How about multilingual?
It's a great question. So we have Our UK team has been at the forefront of developing the localization aspects, having forms in multiple languages, the same form in multiple languages. There's some great examples on the K2 community site, k2underground.com, that show that. I'm happy to provide you some more information, and we'll follow up after that to show you some examples.
And from Don, does the K2 platform change the branding of my SharePoint site?
No, not at all. That's entirely up to you. We have no interest in the branding of your site. The look and feel I showed you of that SharePoint 2010 experience is just a custom one that was created by some of our graphic designers to make it look a little sexy. But if you've branded your user experience in SharePoint, all K2 is interested in is helping you build forms, build workflows, deliver those solutions to your customers.
Next question from Michelle Lopez. Is the data recorded from your demonstration in a form published to a SharePoint list, and also can more than one attachment be attached?
It's a great question. So you can choose where you save that information. You could save it in a SharePoint list. You could save it in a database like SQL Server or Oracle or any other line of business. That's all available through that smart object infrastructure I spoke about. So the choice is yours, whatever makes sense for your solution. And you can hook that up accordingly. And was there a second part to that question, Michelle?
The number of attachments.
Number of attachments. Yes, you can have multiple attachments. There's no constraint on how the number of documents you attach. And again, Smart Objects is driving that, so you can upload those straight to a SharePoint document library or some other location if it makes sense for your solution.
Great. And from Patrick, what about complex repeating sections like you can have with InfoPath?
Yep, so that's provided through the inline editing through the list control. So the list view will give you the ability to do inline editing, and you can add different control types into that same sort of concept.
And could K2 Designer be a good replacement for SharePoint Designer?
They do very different things. So if you're doing things like branding, for SharePoint, that's obviously a SharePoint Designer. In fact, SharePoint Designer, a lot of the functionality is very focused on, particularly in 2013, around that type of thing. The K2 Designer experience for us is about building forms, building smart objects, building workflow, so building business applications that you can incorporate and that can leverage your SharePoint assets there as well. So there's definitely a need for both. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. But certainly from a workflow perspective, yes, you can build workflows in K2 Designer, build forms in K2 Designer as well.
And from a mobility, with SmartForms, what if I want to support the same form on the mobile and PC? What needs to be done?
So there's a couple of things you can do. Obviously you can design it in such a way that it accommodates that, so you can have more of a linear design experience if you're going to build those types of forms and you have that experience. You can add additional rules. When I was showing you dragging on the the person who's logged in, that logged in details field, as part of those standard attributes available on a form are things like device type, resolution type. So you could even create dynamic rules that say, if the resolution is less than X, do this to the form if you wanted to get to that level of detail. Alternatively, you can take a design experience that is perhaps a bit more linear in the way you design those forms.
And what about pricing on SmartForms and Smart Objects?
So happy to talk to you about pricing. We offer some fairly attractive rates depending upon obviously the number of users, the types of applications you're rolling out. More than happy to take that up with you, and we can follow up with you directly on that.
Another question from Cynthia. Is the 2013 K2 SmartForms solution available now, and does it work for SharePoint 365?
Great question. So we're currently going through, we've released a beta of our SharePoint 2013 bits. We'll most probably release another beta of that before Christmas, and then that's likely to RTM early in the new year. And that's a fantastic question that, yes, it will most certainly support SharePoint on-premises and Office 365, and importantly, you can build solutions in both. So if you can build these hybrid solutions that actually span both your Office 365 environment and your SharePoint on-premises environment, either as individual solutions or as solutions that interact, actually having one solution that touches both environments.
And from Tim, in your demonstration, are you using a web service to connect to Active Directory?
No, we've got a direct integration with Active Directory as part of that Smart Object infrastructure, and that's an out-of-the-box feature. We provide out-of-the-box integration with about a dozen different environments, and equally that's a very extensible infrastructure as well. And we also provide the ability for Smart Objects to consume things like web services, WCF, and even .NET assemblies and the like as well, if you have that type of infrastructure.
And from Tim again, can current InfoPath forms be converted to K2?
The magic button. Everyone's looking for just a magic button to be able to convert forms of different types. So the short answer is no, and there's a reason for that, is that a lot of the InfoPath paradigm really is very document-centric, and so if there was a conversion process, we don't want to be bringing, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's going to come across that way, but we don't want to be bringing bad practices of a very document-centric forms technology into SmartForms, and so that's why there's not a conversion tool. What we do have is obviously a lot of guidance around that. I mentioned that help document that's available on our customer and partner site in terms of providing guidance for migrating from InfoPath to SmartForms, and that's equally where you can engage K2's professional services or a number of our partners as well. K2 has a great partner network that can help in that space to provide that guidance and assistance, either on-site or remote as well.
Another question, where is the form application hosted? Can it also work with O365?
I think we've touched on that. So yes, it can certainly work with, integrate with Office 365. At the moment, K2 is an on-premises install, but in terms of being able to present those forms into an Office 365 environment or even into a standalone web application, that's certainly possible as well.
And can you control the views based on user account?
So if you want to put some constraint around who's logging in, you can certainly do that. Another way is, through the rules. Another way is around process. A lot of times when working with workflow, it's about assigning a task to the right person, given that right context, present them with the form to make the right decision. So a lot of that control will be driven throughout a standard and structured process and using dynamic rules to ensure that the right person is receiving that task.
Great. Another question from Beth. Does the K2 form support code behind the way InfoPath does, or do the smart objects have enough configuration, so no need for customizations that InfoPath requires?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the SmartForms and Smart Objects platform is very much about rapidly composing solutions. Now, if you're wanting to dive into a code level experience, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You could obviously go and create a custom control for the Smart Objects, for the SmartForms environment, and once you've created that control, you can use it across all of your views and all of your forms. Equally, Smart Objects is most probably the place where you want to start doing integration or service calls and things like that. And the great thing about Smart Objects is that we can automatically talk to things like web services and .NET assemblies, as well as all of those line of business systems that I've touched on and a bunch of that I didn't talk about. So in that respect, if you already have an asset, there's every chance we can already consume that and present that logic up into the forms experience.
And where is the form data stored?
I think we touched on that already. It's ultimately up to you. It's going to be driven by your smart objects, whether that's a list in SharePoint, whether that's Dynamic CRM, SQL, Oracle. I could list a bunch of different line of business systems. It really depends upon where you want to store that information, what makes sense to your the solution you're building. If you just want to use the the most simple out-of-the-box point and click approach to building a K2 solution, then K2 will actually go and provision a table for you in SQL. It'll be completely abstracted away, so you'll just be using that web-based experience to do it, but the underpinnings of that, we can store the data in SQL for you. Makes it nice and easy because as your solution grows, or if you want to do other things with that information, it becomes very easy to access that information through smart objects as well.
Is the integration with SharePoint support more workflow tracking than InfoPath does?
So yes, certainly from a workflow perspective, the K2 workflow platform is a very mature workflow platform that's been around and even exceeds our InfoPath integration. So we've been doing workflow, K2's been doing workflow for well over a decade now, getting close to 15 years. And that workflow platform that K2 provides is very mature in the sense of building workflows around, obviously, SharePoint context, as well as workflows outside of that SharePoint context. If I'm just building a forms and workflow-based experience that perhaps just uses SharePoint for document management, then fantastic, I can build very rich, mature processes around that. If you're interested in the K2 workflow piece, we'll be covering that very specifically as part of a broader application in that webinar we'll be running in 2 weeks' time at this same time slot.
All right, so it looks like most of the rest of the questions you've kind of already touched on some of the topics. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it back over to you to close out.
Look, thank you, Michelle, for proctoring that. Everyone, really appreciate your time today. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you got some good insight into both SmartForms, insight into really modern form requirements, what the customers we're talking to, and really what the industry at large is looking for when we're dealing and creating with forms-based solutions. Remember, forms on data with workflow ultimately means building business applications, be they simple, horizontal solutions that work, and provide a lot of value in organizations, or whether they're the other end of that spectrum are, core business scenarios that really drive the fundamentals of an organization forward. All of that is capable on the K2 platform. It's really about choosing how you want to apply that, what business problem you're looking to solve, and using K2 Workflow, K2 Smart Objects, and for today, K2 Smart Forms can help you build those business applications. Thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate those. For those of you who hang around a little bit over time, I thank you for that. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. You can get me on my email, which is jk, the letter J, the letter K, @k2.com. Thank you for your time.